Without a doubt, the richest person in Rome's history was Marcus Licinius Crassus. In addition to owning hundreds of rental properties across the city, he had silver mines. He also had his own private fire department, which he would send out to put out fires. However, before his team put out the flames, he would approach the distressed property owner with a discounted offer to buy the building. Everything that is fundamental to his character is revealed in this final detail. He had enough gold to support the Roman army for a long time. He had enough land to build a small city. His wealth was such that it no longer felt like real wealth. Instead, it was like a score on a balance sheet that you have to update all the time, because that's the only thing that still makes you feel anything. Nevertheless, Crassus was not satisfied. He felt nothing as he stared at his gold. He felt everything as he watched his rivals. By 60 BC, Julius Caesar, Gnaeus Pompey, and Marcus Crassus are the three main leaders of Rome. They may be referred to as a trio in partnership, but they are known historically as the first triumvirate. Caesar is incredibly talented, charming, intelligent, and uninterested in following social norms. He's the kind of partner who makes other people appear lethargic. In contrast, Pompey has a strong reputation. In just 90 days, he eradicated pirates from the seas, fought bravely throughout the eastern Mediterranean, and returned to Rome with such immense glory that the crowds sobbed upon his arrival. In contrast, Crassus is the wealthy one. He made sure the business ran smoothly by providing funding for both Caesar and Pompey. Both would not have been as successful without Crassus. In most corporate environments, the person in charge of the finances has influence over the business, but in this specific instance, this was not the case. During dinner gatherings, Senate meetings, and the grand celebrations that Rome hosted, Crassus was consistently mentioned as the third figure alongside Caesar and Pompey. He had heard this sequence so often that he no longer noticed the pause before his name. When Pompey returned from the east and celebrated his triumph, the streets of Rome were filled with people oblivious to the financial contributions Crassus had made. They cheered for Pompey and Caesar, but not for the man whose wealth had enabled it all. Crassus observed the scene and realized, perhaps for the first time, that money cannot create a narrative. One must venture out and accomplish something that transcends mere financial figures. He needed to launch a military campaign, not in Rome's favor, not in a strategic manner. However, for personal reasons, he wanted to make a conquest so enormous, so unquestionable, and so far beyond the reach of a mere financier that history would have to give his name precedence. He chose Parthia. Large, wealthy, little known, and ideally situated across the Roman border, was the Persian Empire's successor. It looked like a good target to acquire on paper. In actuality, it was a market he had never studied, in a region he did not comprehend, and against an adversary whose entire military plan was designed to vanquish the exact type of army Rome was about to dispatch. Nonetheless, the financial picture looked good. Every failed investment has a similar pattern. First, there appears to be a clear-cut opportunity. The consultant whose advice you are reluctant to follow comes next. Then there's another consultant, the one who gives you the comfort you long for. Finally, there is the crucial moment of decision-making. All these elements were present in Crassus's expedition into Parthia. Artavasdes, the king of Armenia, was the real advisor. The Armenian king was familiar with the Parthians, much like one knows a neighbor who has been trying to break into your fence for 30 years. Armenia was situated on Parthia's northern border. Artavasdes made a big offer to Crassus. "Let your army cross my territory. I'll use my cavalry to strengthen your forces. In order to limit the Parthians' ability to use their cavalry advantage, we will attack from the north through colder, wetter terrain." This was wise counsel. It was the right advice. It was the advice of someone who had a thorough understanding of the circumstances. Crassus refused. At 62, he had no interest in a longer journey, and the northern route was longer. The other advisor was an Arab sheikh by the name of Ariamnes, who told Crassus that the Parthian army was weak and disorganized, and that the Parthian king was distracted by matters in the east. Now was the best time to attack directly through the Syrian desert, which was the easiest path. There was a need for swift and decisive action. The Parthians were actually Ariamnes's employer. Crassus valued Ariamnes's report because it supported his own findings. Shorter, faster, and more spectacular was the route across the Syrian desert. It would make for a more captivating story and appear better on a map. Ariamnes became his guide. The Roman army entered the Syrian desert in the summer of 53 BC. They arrived in the sweltering summer months rather than in spring or the cooler months. The sun was already contributing, so the Parthians had nothing to do right now. Wearing full Roman armor, 40,000 soldiers trudged across a desolate, dry, and level terrain, while withstanding temperatures that tested human endurance. The soldiers' pace, once a source of Roman pride for being the fastest sustained march in antiquity, began to wane, and the vivid red of the Roman standards began to fade. Ariamnes led them through the vast desert while riding at the front of the group beside Crassus, full of energy and willingness to help. He said he had sent riders to scout the area in advance. Everything seemed secure. In reality, the riders he had dispatched were going to the Parthian general Sharena to deliver reports rather than conduct reconnaissance. Under the sweltering summer sun, Rome's most expensive army in a generation was marching directly toward a well-prepared enemy under the command of the enemy's own spy. Crassus, meanwhile, was sitting at the front on his horse, reviewing his campaign notes on a wax tablet and thinking about what he would say when he won. On a June morning in 53 BC, close to the town of Carrhae, in what is now southeastern Turkey, the Roman army faced off against the Parthian cavalry. Crassus arranged his legions into a broad battle line, which was the typical Roman tactic against cavalry, and prepared for their charge. The Parthians complied, advancing from all sides, creating the sound and appearance of a large army ready for battle. Then, they halted just beyond the reach of Roman javelins. They pivoted and began to fire. Roman military tactics were predicated on the idea that the enemy would eventually come to you. You hold your ground, repel the first attack, interlock your shields, and then fight in close quarters, where Roman discipline and training outperform all other armies in the world. The Parthian horse archers, on the other hand, moved in circles and fired from a distance rather than charging. Additionally, they had an advantage that Roman strategists had not fully considered: camels with extra arrows. With quivers, these camels remained behind the Parthian formations. An archer would retreat to replenish his arrows when they ran out before moving forward once more. In actuality, they had an almost infinite supply of arrows on the battlefield. Roman shields are not built to withstand an afternoon of fire, but they can survive 1, 2, or even 3 volleys. Crassus instructed his son Publius, a skilled young officer who had fought alongside Caesar in Gaul, to lead a cavalry assault to disrupt the Parthian encirclement. Publius charged forward with 1,000 Gallic cavalry and some infantry. The Parthians fell back, luring him away from the main group. Once he was sufficiently distanced, they halted their retreat. He found himself encircled. His entire unit was annihilated. The Parthians returned to the main Roman formation, bearing Publius's standard. Additionally, they carried something else on a long spear, something round that Crassus could see from across the battlefield. Crassus never fully bounced back from that incident. His commanders took charge of the rest of the battle. The Romans maintained their formation. Their discipline was remarkable even in disaster, but the formation diminished as the afternoon progressed. Imagine it as a balance sheet going into the red in real time. Resources were running low. Debts were increasing. There was no plan for escape. By the end of the day, 20,000 Romans had perished. 10,000 were taken prisoner. Crassus withdrew to the town of Carrhae with what was left. The golden eagle, the revered standard of the legion, representing Roman military pride, the most significant asset on this particular account, was seized. Several eagles. Rome had previously lost eagles, but never in such a manner. That night, in Carrhae, Crassus was surrounded by the ruins of his abortive campaign, in a city devoid of Roman influence, and in a house that wasn't his own. He was offered a number of options by his generals, but none were desirable. He had 3 options: surrender, try to flee through enemy territory with a diminished army, or try to negotiate. He asked to meet with the Parthian leader and chose to negotiate. He left with a few escorts the next morning to attend the meeting, but he didn't come back. The precise details surrounding Crassus's death are a matter of debate. However, it is agreed that he was killed during or shortly after discussions with the Parthian general, Sharena, under circumstances that imply betrayal. At the time of his death, he was 62 years old. Just 6 months prior, he had been one of the 3 most influential figures in the world. He perished in a foreign desert following a meeting he had initiated. This is where his narrative takes a turn that history finds hard to forget. According to historical narratives, such as those written by Cassius Dio long after the events, the Parthians poured molten gold down Crassus's throat after his death. This story may be made up, perhaps intended for people who are infamous for having irrational desires. However, it has endured for 2 millennia because of its startling irony. A man who devoted his life to accumulating wealth, eventually getting it in the most straightforward way imaginable. Here it is. As the story implies, you pursued the East, you desired gold, you wanted all of it, this is it. Upon returning to Rome, the response was not one of sorrow, but rather of strategic thinking. Caesar learned of the events at Carrhae and quickly understood its implications for the power dynamics. Pompey, upon hearing the news, started to devise new strategies. The Senate released expressions of sorrow. The first triumvirate, the alliance that had governed Rome for nearly 10 years, effectively dissolved with Crassus's demise in the desert. Without the financial backer, the 2 prominent leaders had no remaining reason to avoid conflict. Crassus's greatest fear, becoming insignificant, was realized the moment he left. The alliance that depended on him had merely been waiting for someone with sufficient funds to prevent it from collapsing. He had served as the essential support structure, and no one realized its importance until it was no longer there. The Roman eagles that were captured, including those belonging to Crassus, were held by the Parthians for many years. They became a representation of Roman defeat and Parthian pride, showcased in Parthian temples and presented to visitors as proof of the consequences of Roman overreach. Eventually, Rome managed to retrieve them. 60 years later, Augustus secured their return through diplomatic means, a careful and thoughtful strategy that Crassus had deliberately avoided. He achieved through diplomacy what Crassus had attempted to accomplish through military force. It turned out that the opportunity for negotiation had always been available.